Hi, everyone. We have a very good turnout today. Welcome to this high-level event on promoting responsible investment in Myanmar. I think that's a goal that we all share, and it will be interesting to have a good discussion of it today. Now, of course, we've learned from Zoom meetings that the human has a capacity to pay attention for only 2 hours. So we've kept this meeting to specifically to 2 hours. We know we have a very, very busy agenda, and so we need to keep moving throughout the 2-hour session, but we hope there'll be opportunities for a good discussion. It's also, the advantage of Zoom is, of course, we have 357 participants and growing. So I think it shows that we can reach a broader audience without you having to leave the comfort of your own home. So let me begin now. I'll introduce, for the opening session, we have very high-level participants, and I'll introduce each speaker in turn as they speak. So let's begin first with Excellency U Tong Tun, who is the Minister, Union Minister of Investment and Foreign Economic Relations in Myanmar. Minister, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Good afternoon, everybody. Your Excellency, Ambassador Renati Sabatucci, Ambassador of the EU to Myanmar, Mr. Giacomo Solari, Head of Cooperation and Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of Switzerland, Ms. Lise Nogard, Chargé d'Affaires, the Royal Norwegian Embassy, Yangon, and of course, our good friend, Stephen, Head of OECD's Investment and Sustainable Development Unit. To all of you, a very warm welcome. Welcome also to the International Chambers present and to the media who have turned out today. It's good to be with you all today. Let me begin by thanking all our friends, Norway, Switzerland, the EU, the OECD, the ILO, OSCEM, Eurochem, MCRB, MID, MGMA, and UMFCCI for contributing to today's event. But more importantly, I'd like to thank you all for the excellent results achieved together with us here at the Ministry of Investment and Foreign Economic Relations as part of the second investment policy review process. Your advice, your friendship and words of support, sometimes frank, but always constructive, have proved invaluable throughout the years. Let me also take a moment to express my sincere appreciation to the staff here at the Ministry and at DICA in Yangon for your dedication and teamwork, delivering difficult reforms, supporting business and private enterprise, making it easier for investors to establish and expand existing investments, and for promoting Myanmar as an attractive investment destination. You have done an outstanding job. This latest investment policy review stands as a testament to your dedication and diligence. Ladies and gentlemen, responsible investment represents a cornerstone of this government's vision, a vision of an economy and a society that works for everyone, that benefits the MSME on a street corner in Mandalay just as much as the big multinationals up in the Twin Towers of Myanmar Plaza. I welcome this opportunity to be with you, not just to talk about what we together have done to improve the investment enabling environment here in Myanmar, and we have done a lot, but also to talk about what we intend to do to sustain and improve the environment over the years to come. It was the American founding father, investment pioneer and polymath, Ben Franklin, who once wrote, and I quote, "The best investment is in the tools of one's own trade," end of quotation. He also stressed an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. The first investment promotion review, IPR, launched back in 2014, still early in our democratic transition, provided us with such a tool. as an in-depth analysis accompanied by comprehensive policy recommendations that have helped lay the foundations of a new investment regime and quality labor standards, and with it, a new era of quality investments into Myanmar. And this investment in knowledge continues to pay dividends to this day. We have made important progress across a range of areas. In 2016, we merged our investment laws while offering a simplified set of regulations, providing a level playing field for both foreign and local investors alike, boosting investor confidence and making us more competitive regionally and globally. Environmental protection standards, responsible business conduct, and corporate social responsibility, respect for human rights, responsible sourcing practices within supply chains, and decent work for fair wages. All are now embedded within our national reform agenda thanks to the IPR process. In June, we ratified the ILO Minimum Age Convention, setting a minimum age for employment, keeping more children in school while prohibiting hazardous activities for those under 18 years of age. This development has been acknowledged as a positive step, particularly in the context of the current COVID-19 crisis, which threatens the rights, safety, and development of a large number of children in our country. We are also capitalizing our substantial but untapped gender dividend by supporting more women entrepreneurs to succeed in business and by promoting gender equality and non-discrimination within the workplace. Myanmar is actively committed to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. In this context, we are aware that women's economic empowerment will be critical, not only for the achievement of gender equality, but also because it underpins the achievement of other goals. But not only am I proud of what we have achieved to date, I'm also positive about the future, not just because foreign investments in our energy, manufacturing, and real estate sector is growing, which it is, not just because foreign investment across the hundreds of high-quality projects approved since the first IPR are today providing hundreds of thousands of quality jobs for men and women throughout all states and regions, which they are, and not just because investment reforms we have pursued have made the overall investment approval process faster, more transparent, and more efficient, which it has. I'm optimistic because if I had to choose a moment in the country's history to be born, a moment in which I would have the surest chance of success, I would choose today. I would opt to be part of Generation Z, or Z, as they say in the United States. Today, our nation is more prosperous than at any time in living memory. Our democracy is stronger. Fewer of our people are experiencing poverty, and more of our children are in school. Our people are living longer, happier, healthier lives than at any point in time. And were an investor to ask, when do you think is the best time to invest here in Myanmar? I would say today, right now. The World Bank has recognized Myanmar as amongst its top 20 reformers on the Ease of Doing Business Index. The OECD calls the degree of statutory liberalization we have achieved in just 5 years as being almost unprecedented. There is no better time than today to expand your investment portfolio in Myanmar. There is no better time to build a new business in Myanmar than today. Never before has growth remained as consistently high. Notwithstanding the pandemic, our schools and universities are stronger, ensuring a new generation of Myanmar workers are prepared and are ready to take on the 21st century challenges. We also know that a healthy workforce is a productive workforce, and I know our health sector will recover from this pandemic stronger and better and even more capable than ever before. With this month's signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, we now have in place a world-class free trade agreement that has leveled the playing field, facilitating access to new markets, lowering the cost of exports, reducing tariffs and custom duties, and protecting intellectual property. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the people of Myanmar have spoken, and in doing so, they have granted us a clear mandate. They are counting on this government to deliver. This was the message they sent when millions of our countrymen and women went to the polls on the morning of 8th November earlier this month. Our ability to deliver matter. Our ability to deliver smarter, more sustainable, and more inclusive growth, and to reduce inequality will hinge on our ability to continue the change and transformation begun just 5 short years ago. Delivering reforms that attract more investment from a wider variety of partners in a wider variety of sectors. Reforms that reduce barriers and promote greater integration. We will need to follow through on our commitment to connecting every household to the energy grid by 2030, which we will. We will do so by leapfrogging carbon-based energy strategies with a continued commitment to green growth, including off-grid renewable energy, and with the effective and consistent implementation of environmental impact assessments, ensuring projects that fully comply with environmental laws, regulations, and management plans. And we will need smart tax policies that attract quality, responsible investment while deterring tax evasion, incentivizing companies to pay their fair share for the roads and bridges, ports, and other public infrastructure they use. We will also need an expansion of online tax payment platform, tax deductions for training expenses, and reforms to property tax. So we will do that too. We will need to build back better, and we must do so with a sense of urgency. Other countries are not waiting around for us to catch up. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, if we are to fulfill the promise we have made to the people of Myanmar, the promise of a stronger, more inclusive, more prosperous nation, then we must also pay attention to assumptions that underpin previous investment policy reform efforts. COVID-19 is easily the most severe pandemic of the modern age and perhaps the most significant global event of our lifetime. Myanmar has, like so many others, faced economic downturns and hardship. Myanmar and the world have shifted fundamental ways between the first and second IPR. Some changes were caused by COVID-19, others hastened by it, others well underway before the pandemic struck. As the world begins to rebuild and we turn our heads towards the future, we must take these shifts into account. This means reviewing assumptions that underpin our Myanmar Investment Promotion Plan and making revisions where needed. And just as our new recovery plan has been designed to help rebuild our nation's economy, FDI can sustain that recovery and advance it. We will need to make it easier to secure permits, easier to obtain appropriate and lawful access to land, via the Land Bank, greater transparency in tendering and project selection via the Project Bank, while ensuring prior and informed consent of impacted communities and the traditional land use rights are respected. These are precisely the actions called for as part of our new Myanmar Economic Resilience and Recovery Plan, MERP, which we hope will see the light of day in the next week or so. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we know that countries that open up to FDI create more jobs and opportunities than those that do not. The assistance and guidance made available to us via the second IPR will help us continue to promote responsible investment into Myanmar, the type that creates jobs, opens up new opportunities, sustains growth, and spreads prosperity. My sincere gratitude to the team at the OECD. Your efforts will be met with equally strong cooperation on our part, and the need to work together at a time when others are turning inward could not be more urgent. Because this is not just about making money, FDI builds bridges between our peoples, our cultures, and our countries. It advances all of us together. When we share the risk, we share the reward. When we succeed, we all benefit. And as a testament to our shared success, we shall leave a legacy of modern ports and pipelines, of schools and skyscrapers, and smart factories and freeways, so that when our children reflect on which moment in Myanmar's history they believe offers them the surest chance of success, they too will agree this decade was a defining moment in our history. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for that inspiring and optimistic speech. I think I share that optimism. Thank you also for the kind words about the investment policy reviews, both the first and the second. I mean, we've done many reviews worldwide, dozens of them, and I think it's safe to say that we've never encountered government officials so willing to listen to international advice and so quick to act on it as we have working in Myanmar. So thank you again for those opening remarks and for showing the review. Yes, thank you. And now
this is the result of our hard work. So this is the work we have done together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Ambassador Ranieri Sabatucci, Ambassador of the European Union to Myanmar. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, thank you for this good introduction, Minister. Minister U Tam Thun, Union Minister for the Ministry of Investment and Foreign Economic Relations. Mr. Giacomo Solari, Deputy Head of Mission and Head of Cooperation of the Government of Switzerland in Myanmar, and Mrs. Lise Norgard, Chargé d'Affaires of the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Yangon. So I would like to also greet all the participants, colleagues, and the ladies and gentlemen who are participating in this conversation. I would like also to start by congratulating the Minister and our friends of Myanmar for the peaceful and successful elections, which have delivered a clear and unambiguous result. We know how much business appreciates stability, and we look forward to working with the government, the European and the Myanmar business community, and the people of Myanmar in the years to come to promote and expand inclusive and sustainable business environment. Allow me also to congratulate the government of Myanmar, but especially Minister Thong Thun, for the successful conclusion of the RCEP agreement. As a partner very much involved in trade and investment of the region, and through a number of free trade agreements, whether they're under negotiation or concluded, such as the one with the ASEAN Group, Japan, and Korea, plus the option of a region-to-region EU-ASEAN free trade agreement, the EU believes that RCEP will contribute in reinforcing the international rule-based trade and investment system among its members and beyond. I would like to finally commend Myanmar for going through the second investment policy review already since 2014, which gives us the opportunity for today's interesting dialogue. It shows Myanmar's commitment to engage in a meaningful structural reforms of the business regulatory environment and hence to attract quality investment. As we all know, investment is not all the same. 1 million euro invested do not always produce the same results. The quality investment we are looking here is the one that you have mentioned, dear Minister, is the one that produces decent jobs, which provide decent salaries that enable workers to provide for dignified existence of their family and themselves. The investment we're also seeking to attract and promote is the one that does not go to the expenses of Myanmar's extraordinary and unique natural resource environment, an environment that ought to contribute to the well-being of all the people of Myanmar over the decades to come. Responsible business conduct was already identified as a key challenge in the first IPR of Myanmar. The second review delivers a list of very valuable and meaningful recommendations that we believe would contribute to create an environment conducive to a thriving, sustainable society in Myanmar. And allow me just to commend the OECD for the quality of the work they have done on the very extremely valuable recommendations. Dear Minister, allow me to recall that what we are doing in Europe, in the EU, in respect to these issues. Responsible business conduct is important for us, but it also serves to remind everyone of what we have committed to do ourselves in Europe. In the EU, the concept of human and labor rights and sustainable development, including responsible business conduct, is anchored in the EU treaties. The treaties impose us that the EU promotes high social and environmental standards and the respect of human rights in Europe and abroad, including in the field of economy and trade. In practice, this is implemented first through legislation and policies. For example, EU importers of certain minerals from conflict-affected areas must undertake due diligence for their supply chains. The EU regulation is largely based on the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected areas and high-risk areas. The EU is also looking at new initiatives on sustainable corporate governance, and the one that is being recently launched by the EU Justice Commissioner, Reinders, to address human rights and environmental concern across economic value chains. This proposal is firmly grounded in international recognized standards, including the UN guiding principles of business and human rights, OECD due diligence schemes, or ILO standards. Second, the EU negotiates its trade agreement and trade preferential schemes, like GSP schemes, including the EBA, as a platform to promote social and environmental sustainability across the supply chains, again based on international standards developed by the UN, ILO, and OECD. The inclusions of key provisions on labor, environment, and human rights in our external trade policy is a fundamental requirement from our end. From us, the EU as a public authority, but most importantly, Minister, for us at least, is our European consumers who are demanding us to act in this way. One should not underestimate EU citizens' concerns. They are genuine. Expectations from EU citizens as regards sustainability have never been stronger. This sentiment has been further reinforced by the COVID-19 pandemic. In Europe, sustainability in all its dimensions occupies the scene, be it as a daily topic in the press and the social media, or as an essential parameter in consumption models and entrepreneurship initiatives. While Myanmar, like all economies across the world, looks at its recovery prospect, including in terms of relaunching manufacturing and reviving export, it has the opportunity to focus on sustainability in order to regain export market shares and attract foreign investment. This is very much an approach that we in Europe are following as we look forward promoting a post-COVID recovery for ourselves. So what are the prospects for post-COVID recovery? The crisis has exposed the vulnerability of our economies and unregulated supply chains, and has hit harder than the most vulnerable communities. It has also shown how interlinked our economies are, which means that no one has been spared from the social and economic fallout, but also that we can no longer ignore one part of the supply chains simply because it's located abroad. Integrated better risk management processes and good governance practices across supply chain will generate a net advantage in the long term. RBC practices pay off. Low energy use, unpolluted waters and air, high safety and labor standards. This leads to satisfied, hence loyal workers and customers. Rebuilding the economies in an even more sustainable way is not just a plus, it is a necessity. In the EU, this has been enshrined in the European Green Deal, which is the center of every policy that in the EU institutions are actually focusing on. The EU is also conducting an internal review of its trade and investment policies. It is obvious that the sustainability angle of trade policy has significantly increased over the last years. And this is one of the reasons why we are conducting this review. Myanmar is certainly also in a position to respond to sustainability challenges, for example, by upgrading its policy framework for trade and investment, including through responsible business conduct. This would be a positive signal sent towards those investors that will have to bring with them these high standards and practices in Myanmar. The EU stands ready to accompany Myanmar along this process, and this actually happens through responsible supply chains in Asia project, like this one, but also in the framework of the ongoing EBA enhanced engagement with Myanmar. Even through the ongoing EBA process is separate from the RSC Asia project, the former should be seen as an essential avenue to progress on responsible business as a whole, with the ultimate goal of ensuring a thriving, sustainable society in Myanmar. To conclude, ministers and dear friends, a responsible, inclusive and fair society is an independent and resilient society, able to ensure prosperity for its citizens over a long period of time. I wish all a fruitful discussion, and I hope that our support through the Responsible Supply Chain in Asia program, as one of the main examples of the EU concrete engagement in this field, will remain instrumental in supporting government and business endeavor toward Myanmar's sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think that sets the scene very well for the discussion over the next hour and a half. I now turn the floor to Mr. Giacomo Solari, Deputy Head of Mission and Head of Cooperation of the Government of Switzerland in Myanmar. Mr. Solari.
Your Excellency, Minister U Thant Thun, and distinguished participants of the Myanmar government, Excellency Ambassador Ranieri Sabatucci, Chargé d'Affaires Lise Nordgaard, and Mr. Stephen Thompson, Head of OECD Investment and Sustainable Development Unit. Ladies and gentlemen, Minglapa. It is a great pleasure and truly an honor to join you here today. I would like to convey my heartfelt thanks to Minister U Thant Thun, Deputy Minister Bharat Singh, Permanent Secretary Aung Naing U, and each and every expert and stakeholder for their contribution and personal involvement in making this second investment review the guiding document that it is. We hope that this is a modest but appreciated contribution of the OECD, Switzerland, Norway, and partners to Myanmar's sustainable development. The first investment policy has had a durable impact on Myanmar's investment framework. It has provided a roadmap for key reforms and policies such as the Myanmar Investment Law, the Companies Law, and the Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan, just to mention a few. Based on these successes, the second review was conducted with the aim of addressing the remaining challenges and to strengthen reform processes in a way in which sustainability is understood as a key business driver and opener for investment opportunities. A growing body of evidence indicates that sustainability initiatives can help to generate profits and profitable business. Promoting inclusive and sustainable economic development is at the core of our cooperation program in Myanmar. We focus in areas such as technical and vocational education and training, TVET, closely working with the private sector and the state, and we support sustainable value chains in tourism, rubber, horticulture, for instance, by promoting the link between biodiversity and trade with valuable Myanmar products such as Tanaka, tea, and jajab. We also promote partnerships with international private companies, for instance, supporting coffee producers in remote areas to export to foreign markets. Switzerland, with partners such as Norway and the EU, is supporting the peace process, focusing on the link between peace and development, social cohesion, and durable solutions. One area where we pay particular attention is the process around the implementation of the national land use policy and the elaboration of an umbrella national land law, to which specific laws as the vacant, fallow, and virgin land law should then align. These laws and policies are key for opening up sustainable investments in Myanmar, but they are also crucial for protecting the rights of the communities that depend on those lands, even when under customary tenure. Switzerland particularly appreciates that a wide array of different stakeholders were consulted for this review, including with regard to land investment and governance policies. We encourage you to continue to do so and to look at investments, inclusive and sustainable growth, as well as durable peace and social harmony in a holistic way. Myanmar has been one of the world's fastest growing economies. Despite the setback due to COVID-19, which will have a lasting impact on the poorer segments of the population, Myanmar still stands as a country in Asia with a huge potential. Taking into account the aspiration of the Myanmar people, including ethnic minorities, will lead to more equitable development and to sustainable peace, which will in turn bring more prosperity by expanding the opportunities for investments in areas such as tourism, sustainable energy production, natural resource management, and trade, just to mention some. The second investment policy review is a valid instrument towards these objectives, contributing to the Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan, the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the MERRP, the Myanmar COVID Recovery Plan mentioned by Minister U Thant Thum. Switzerland remains committed to support Myanmar in these transitions. Jesudin Bade.
Thank you, Mr. Solari, and thank you also for Switzerland's support for the investment policy review together with Norway, as you mentioned. I now give the floor to Elise Nordgaard, Chargée d'Affaires, Royal Norwegian Embassy in Yangon. Please.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Union Minister U Thant Thum, Minister of Investment and Foreign Economic Relations, Your Excellency Ambassador Sabatucci, Ambassador to the European Union, Mr. Solari, Deputy Head of Mission and Head of Cooperation of the Government of Switzerland in Myanmar, distinguished participants, good afternoon, Mingalabar. Thank you for the opportunity to make opening remarks at this important event. I will start by thanking His Excellency Union Minister U Thant Thum for the government's initiative to carry out this investment policy review. I will also thank the investment team at the OECD, the Directorate of Investment and Company Administration at the Interministerial Task Force for producing this comprehensive analysis of Myanmar's investment policy. Norway commends the efforts made by the Myanmar government to open up the economy, stimulate private investment, and improve the business environment. This effort has paid off through strong economic growth, temporarily halted by COVID-19, and a significant upward move on the ease of doing business ranking of the World Bank. Lately, the COVID-19 pandemic has hit Myanmar's economy hard, as it has for so many economies around the world. We recognize the government's firm response to the pandemic through the COVID-19 Economic Relief Plan and the still in progress Myanmar Economic Recovery and Reform Plan, which will guide Myanmar's effort to revitalize the economy. In this endeavor, private sector investments will play a critical role. Hence, the timing of this review is good. We hope and believe that the recommendations that the review provides will be helpful for the government when policies are refined and implemented, and that the economy will rebound from the COVID-19 slowdown and continue to grow. Your Excellency, reading the investment policy review through the lenses of our focus areas, let me highlight the following 3 findings. The importance of an independent judiciary and legal certainty for all investors. The review describes a number of promising recent initiatives by the government in this respect. The win-win situation that can be achieved by continuing promoting responsible business conduct. This will benefit the societies and the environment where investments are made, but it will also attract responsible investments to Myanmar as Myanmar's reputation may improve and the likelihood of passing international investor scrutiny may increase. And thirdly, how an environmentally conscious investment policy can motivate innovations, attract green technology, and give rise to new economic opportunities. Such policy will also help sustaining the natural resources that provide environmental services on which the well-being of Myanmar's people relies. Hence, another win-win. From Myanmar's Sustainable Development Plan and from previous statements by His Excellency Union Minister U Thant Thun about the importance of building back better, we are confident that these findings resonate well with the views of the government. Several of the major companies in Norway have a solid presence in Myanmar. Transparent framework conditions that ensure predictability and level playing field for all is important both for the Norwegian companies already operating in Myanmar and for those who consider Myanmar as a market for trade and investments. The Norwegian Embassy will work hard to mobilize investments from Norwegian companies and to increase trade between our countries. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, thank you for your attention. I am looking forward to the presentation and the discussions that will follow. Jesutin Bade.
Thank you, Lisa. That concludes the opening session. There's no applause button on Zoom, as far as I know, but I think those four speeches really set the scene well for the discussion in the two panels that will follow. So, having said that, and thank you once again to the distinguished speakers, let me open the first panel session, which is devoted to the launch of the second OECD investment policy review of Myanmar. Now we have the review, as I mentioned earlier, was supported by both Norway and Switzerland. We have three panelists today. I'm sure they don't need any introduction, but of course I will introduce them to you. Ong Nang U, of course, is the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Investment and Foreign Economic Relations. He's someone we refer to simply as DG for many years. He was also the co-chair of a global task force that we created when we updated our policy framework for investment, which is the basis for the investment policy review. So he knows us well, he knows our work well. Thierry Tantmon is CEO of the Myanmar Institute of Directors. We did not have a chance to meet you while we were undertaking this review, but we hope to be able to work with you in the future. And Chris Hughes is a partner at SCM Legal and chairman of OSCHAM in Myanmar. He was very helpful as we were preparing this review, but please don't blame him for any of the content. So I'll begin this. We're running a bit behind time, so I'll try to be quick. And I'll try to present the investment policy review in 10 minutes. Now it's 300 pages, 2 years of work, and to do it in 10 minutes is a bit difficult. But I think we need to leave time for the panelists to speak as well. Let me say at the outset, we have a Myanmar language version of the review, which will be available online. If you don't have time to read 300 pages, the first chapter of the review is more like a summary, which lists all the main recommendations for the review. That will also be online. And if any of you would like the full English language PDF version, you can write to us, to me, or Fernando Mistura, who led the second investment policy review. We have our contacts at the end of this presentation. And also this presentation will be available online as well, a longer version of this presentation. So you don't have to try to take screenshots while I'm presenting. We will have it available for you. Let me say at the outset, we've mentioned COVID already. The high-level opening session mentioned COVID. It is part of the review, obviously, but the review takes a longer-term, more structural look at the challenges in Myanmar. It does look at the impact of COVID. It does look at the government response, but it really is focused on the more structural issues. And those are the ones that I will look at today. Okay. Now, how does this? So, as you probably heard from the various speeches today and from Minister U Tong-tun, this is the second investment policy review of Myanmar. It's unusual for us to undertake a review so quickly after the first one, only 6 years. But in the case of Myanmar, I think we all agree that very much has changed. And one of the aims of the second review is simply to take stock of all of those changes that have occurred in Myanmar. So looking at the first review, we focused on many areas. They're very comprehensive, these reviews, but one element that was key was legislative renewal. Many of the laws, as you know, in Myanmar dated from colonial times. They were antiquated, they were ill-suited to a modern open economy, and it was an important step for the government to start to renew those laws. So first came the investment law in 2016, then another major reform was the companies law. And then there have been other ones, I won't list them all, but special economic zones, industrial zones, intellectual property, arbitration, environmental conservation, and now insolvency law. So I think we can say that to some extent, the challenges in the left column that we presented in the first review, many of them have been addressed to varying degrees in these new laws. Now, of course, we don't need to say much about the Myanmar investment law. You know it very well. It's now well established, but it is. We did make many recommendations on what the law should look like, and I think it is a very good law. It's innovative in some ways. It encourages responsible investment. It has an investment monitoring division. It has an investment grievance mechanism, and it did lead to substantial liberalization of the investment regime. Now, as Minister U Tong-tun said, we do measure statutory discrimination against foreign investors worldwide. We've covered about 80 countries, in fact. And the higher the score, the more discrimination against foreign investors. Excuse me. Now, you'll see that in you won't be able to read these country names probably, but the dark blue columns are Myanmar in 2013 and 2019. And you will see in 2013, Myanmar was one of the most restrictive countries. In fact, at the time, because we didn't have as many countries, Myanmar was the most restrictive country to foreign investment worldwide in our index. But you'll see that between 2013 and 2019, Myanmar has moved basically to the level of openness that we find in Austria. So it's a substantial improvement. It's unprecedented. I mean, we probably said almost unprecedented, and that's what Minister U Tong-tun mentioned. But I think it is. I don't think we've ever seen this type of reform, this type of opening up so quickly in any country we've worked with. Now, of course, why do we care about this? Well, I think we've shown a very clear link between FDI openness, if you like, and the ability of countries to attract foreign investment. And what we've found in other countries is that early and deep reforms can have a substantial impact on FDI inflows. And that's what we're likely to see in Myanmar going forward, I think. Now, of course, the distinguished speakers also mentioned doing business. It's hard not to mention doing business when you're talking about an investment climate. I think when Aung Naing first asked for Myanmar to be included in doing business, it was in last place in starting a business. And by 2020, it's now in 70th place, which is a very respectable score. It's almost 90% of the way to the best performer in that category. But there are two things worth mentioning here. First of all, this success doesn't apply across all areas, as you can see, protecting minority investors, getting credit, and so on. And the second point is, excuse me, it's very good to streamline, to reduce red tape as unnecessary regulations. But at the same time, it shouldn't be pursued just for international rankings. It really should be based on regulatory impact assessments, excuse me, some regulations are there for a very good reason and should remain there. And we found in country after country where we worked as a task force to improve the rankings in doing business. And sometimes the aim is just to improve the ranking and less thinking about whether the regulations are the appropriate ones to ensure sustainable and inclusive. Because that's what we ultimately want from regulations. We want investment that contributes to sustainable and inclusive outcomes. Now, of course, investors have responded to this opening. I think we will see it more. There's always a lag between investment decisions and when the actual FDI inflows come in. Excuse me. You'll also see there's a considerable amount of volatility. This is not quite, it's not surprising given the relatively low levels of investment at the moment. And also the fact that it's based on approvals, which tend to be more lumpy. But I think we will see, if our work on the index is any guide, we will see substantial increases in investment going forward in Myanmar. So turning to the second review, that was more of a stock taking of what's happened since the first review. We have several areas where we have recommendations. These two slides that I will show you now, they cannot give the full flavor of the review. At this level of generality, it's difficult to understand the real nature of the recommendations that we're making. But let me assure you that if you look at the review, there are dozens of recommendations. And excuse me, as Ong Nang-u said in the first review, he praised our recommendations as being candid, objective, and highly practical. And that's exactly what we aimed for in the second review and in all of our reviews. Excuse me. Well, these two slides, I think, will show you the scope of the review more than anything else, show you the areas that we look at in the review. And of course, we look at investment policy, we call it investment policy review, but it really goes much beyond investment policy. And as has already been mentioned today, there is a strong need to strengthen the courts and the arbitration system. This is an important challenge in many countries where we've worked. It's a long-term process of reform. The government should also facilitate long-term land leases for investors and make sure that the intellectual property and arbitration laws are well-resourced with clear implementing regulations. And the government should also balance investor protection with the government's right to regulate in its approach to international treaties. And in this respect, Myanmar is key because it doesn't have a legacy of old generation investment treaties that it has to reconsider. On investment promotion, DICA obviously, I think, is widely praised for the reforms that it has undertaken to date, but it still needs to shift more from an exclusive focus on business licensing towards a more active investment promotion. And this is something that agencies often have a difficulty achieving. We've seen this in the Philippines, perhaps in Indonesia to some extent. It's a difficult transition. And we also think that DICA should focus more on more actively developing linkages between foreign investors and local firms, including SMEs, because DICA has the contacts with foreign investors. And this is a role that many investment promotion agencies try to fulfill. It's difficult, but it's important to maximize the benefits from foreign investment. Now, we also look at special economic zones and industrial zones. They can be very good springboard for broader development, but sometimes they remain simply enclaves or oases of sort of good regulatory practices. And it's important to try to link the zones with the local economy to build up the capacity of local firms to supply foreign investors in the zones. We also look at infrastructure connectivity. We talk about strengthening the framework for public-private investments in infrastructure, the PPP framework, which is essential. It underpins any effective private participation in infrastructure. We also look at the importance of sort of soft infrastructure reforms relating to trade facilitation and so on. Now, on responsible business conduct, it's a core element of what we look at in the reviews, in both the first and the second review. We'll be discussing it in the second panel later this morning, so I won't go into great detail, but I think we've seen from the speeches this morning that responsible business conduct is increasingly a priority in Myanmar, and it's embedded in a number of laws, the Myanmar Investment Law, the Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan. But challenges persist, yes. There's some, perhaps RBC expectations in the Myanmar Investment Law could be clarified, as at a sectoral level as well. The government could develop a national action plan on RBC, as Thailand has recently done. But I'll leave this discussion as essential as it is for the second panel. We also look at green growth. Minister U Tongton mentioned the renewable sector. We look at how to increase investment in renewables. We think the government has made strong policy statements in support of this, which is reassuring for potential investors. There's the Myanmar Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, the National Environmental Policy, and of course the MSDP. But we also look in the review at how not only to increase investment in renewables, but how to strengthen the implementation and monitoring of the environmental impact assessment. And finally, the last issue is land. When we did the first review, we didn't have a specific chapter on land, but we did look at agriculture. And of course, land is essential there. And so we already in the first review pointed to a number of weaknesses, if I can say that, in land tenure and governance, many of which persist to this day. Of course, we have the National Land Use Plan, we have the Agriculture Development Strategy, so there have been improvements, but many of the same challenges persist today. And we understand that this is a very, very difficult issue in Myanmar as well as elsewhere. And we don't have any presumption that we can come and spend a few weeks in Yangon, interview stakeholders, and then tell you exactly what needs to be done. We recognize the complexity of the issue, but I think what the chapter does nicely is bring together the various strands of the issue nicely, and it brings them together. It brings them from an investment perspective, and it makes some good recommendations. So I think it does add significant value in what is a very difficult area. So I won't go on any longer. You see there'll be a web page devoted to the review. We're launching it today. I think at the bottom you should see the contact details for me and Fernando. I don't have it on my screen, but so if you would like the English language PDF, the full version, let us know. If you have any questions that you were not able to ask today to us, please let us know as well. But on that note, I think we really need, excuse me, we really need to move to the panel. Excuse me. We have very little time. Sorry, it's early in the morning here. We have very little time, but I think it's important that we ask some of these questions to the panel. And if we run over 5 minutes, I think Tiana will forgive us for that. So let me begin with U Ong Nang U. You've been involved in both reviews, the first and the second review, and you've been instrumental in pushing through the reforms, the reforms based on the recommendations. And given your focus, the focus of your ministry on investment issues, how do you see the scope for further reforms, for the implementation of further reforms in this area based on the recommendations from the review? And this might be long-term land leases for investors. It might be the costs and benefits of remaining restrictions because we now have RCEP, as was mentioned earlier. And also, how do you see Myanmar's approach to treaties evolving in the future? So that's a lot packed together, but please select whichever areas you'd like to address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Excellency, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, and it's my honor to participate in this important and panel discussion. So firstly, allow me to draw your attention to a few years back, particularly in the beginning of our reform in 2011. So at that time, we had a 1980 foreign investment law. And at that time, we exercised the positivist approach for opening up of foreign investment in the country. All foreign investment to be made in the country require setting up joint venture with the government, one of the government agencies, the line ministry, from the line ministry. Then we started our reform program in collaboration with the OECD in 2012. At the same time, we were in the process of drafting a new Myanmar foreign investment law. And the new Myanmar foreign investment law was enacted in end of 2012. And then what we did was we had some consultations with the government agencies and also some of the stakeholders from the private sectors. And what was happening in the country was, at the time, we tried to introduce change our the kind of scenario from the positivist approach to the negativist approach to open up more for foreign investment to come in the country. But the problem at the time was we encountered three difficult challenges. And number one is the exposure of regulators in the country. When we discussed with the line ministries, a lot of the government ministries, they are willing to open up more for foreign investment in the country. But unfortunately, they didn't have much exposure how they can open up, how they can regulate the incoming foreign investment in the country. A second challenge we encountered was from the SOEs in the country, because SOE, they have a tendency to have some monopoly in their relevant sectors in the country. So therefore, there was some heated discussions between our drafting team and also the Myanmar Investment Commission and ministries at the time. Thirdly, we faced some challenges from the private sector, because at the time, the government idea is to open up more for the economic development of the country. But what happened was at the time, the private sector thought that the tsunami of foreign investment means the collapse of their business. They are not that ready to compete with the foreign investment to come in. Therefore, eventually, although we have a negativist approach in 2012 foreign investment law, but this negative list has a number of the restrictions. Therefore, as Steve mentioned, Myanmar has become one of the most restrictive country for foreign investment in the country. In addition to the restrictions, there are a lot of performance requirements for foreign investors to come and invest in the country. Then, after the launch of the second investment policy review of Myanmar, based on the policy options recommended by the OECD, we started some reform programs. We unified the two investment law. Previously, we had two investment law for foreign investors and for Myanmar local investors. So we try to unify those two investment law into one. And then we aggregate and we put a lot of international best practices in the law. And we try to make our law to be consistent with the ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreements and commitments. And we try to align our investment law with the trade-related investment measures of the WTO agreement. So those are some of the foundations we laid for the drafting of the new investment law. Then, after the promulgation of the new investment law in 2016, we had more wide range of investors and stakeholders consultations, and we tried to reduce the number of restrictions, and we tried to narrow down the list of the negative the sectors in doing business. Therefore, we eventually came up with a few sectors put in the negative list, and we reduced the requirement of joint venture with local partners. Also, we totally abolished the performance requirement for establishment of business in the country. So this is the way we try to improve the ecosystem for doing business in the country. And eventually, we also liberalize, because we know that if we want more investment in the country, we must consider liberalization on the one hand and facilitation on the other. So we jointly do those two important measures together for the attraction of more investment in the country. Then, thanks to our the minimizing the restrictions in the country, Myanmar receives the Star Reformer Award by the World Bank in 2017. This is one of the milestones of our reforms. And then, we have been actually, based on our Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan, we are creating a better ecosystem for doing business in the country. At the same time, we are attracting more investment, particularly responsible investment in Myanmar. Therefore, we are going along with the MSDB in one hand, and also we are now preparing, as my minister explained, we are preparing Myanmar economic relief and reform, recovery and reform plan. That will be another viable for us for more reform. So we are moving forward with a lot of reform programs. And as I noticed in the new investment policy review, there were some recommendations for the kind of the evaluation of costs and benefits of the remaining restrictions or in the manufacturing sector and services sector. Definitely, we will keep moving forward with more liberalization because our ministry's role is to pave the way for more foreign investment in the country. So my minister is leading the entire process of reform program for creation of better the environment for business in the actually not only for the foreign investor but also for our local citizen investors to have a better environment for doing making their business in the country. This is the first point. I just want to respond. Secondly, with regard to land lease kind of registrations, actually, the main thing was the interpretation of what the law said and implementation of the kind of line agency in the country. Because we have enacted the new registration law in 2018, and then the objective of having new registration law is to facilitate all the registration process of immovable properties in the country. The problem still we are encountering is in our the system, we have another different office for registration of the leasing of all immovable property, and we have 1987 the Transfer of Immovable Property Control Act. So that is one of the kind of bottleneck for the doing business for foreigners in the country. However, the law itself is not bad, but interpretation is in the different way. Therefore, there are some the kind of problems and difficulties for foreign investor to go to the office of the record of deed to register their business particularly for long-term land lease in Myanmar. However, if you look at the Myanmar investment law, there is a section 94 which clearly states that whenever, for the purpose of investment, whenever our investment law is conflict with any other laws, investment law prevails. Therefore, we are coordinating with the ORD to understand more about the facilitation or the land lease record in the country. And therefore, then we are also, as part of the policy chapter, investment policy chapter, I also came across some recommendation for the reviewing of the existing bilateral investment treaty. Yes, we have 11 BITs with our partner countries. Out of 11, one BIT with India has already been terminated. We have still 10 BITs existed in the country. Out of 10 BITs, we have only 3 BIT is a new generation BIT. All other 7 BITs are kind of old generation BIT. So we are reviewing that and how we can improve those old generation BIT to be the new one. How we can upgrade those BIT in the country. And in addition to those activities, if you look at the new Myanmar investment law, Myanmar Investment Commission has a right and duty to review the entire investment policy from time to time and recommend to the cabinet for improvement of policy, investment policy in the country. Therefore, we have Myanmar Investment Commission for policy review internally, and we have our Ministry of Investment and Foreign Economic Relations to enhance coordination among the ministries to create a better ecosystem in the country. Therefore, definitely we will keep moving forward with more reform programs for creation of better the investment environment in the country. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Ong. I think that it's very impressive what you've managed to achieve in the 8 years since we've known each other. And of course, we recommend legislative renewal is very important, but we understand that it's difficult to, the interpretation lags sometimes behind by officials. We understand the difficulties with implementation, but I think you need to start with a good legal framework as a basis and then work on improving the implementation over time. So let me turn now to Thierry Tantmon. Let me find your question. So you have a lot of background working. You understand very well, I think, the requirements of leading international companies, given your background, when they want to invest in a company like Myanmar. And one way they might invest, particularly if they're interested in serving the local market, they might invest through a joint venture or some sort of partnership with a local firm. But that can be very risky, obviously. It depends on the corporate governance standards, transparency, protection of minority shareholders, but it also depends on the sort of business ethics and how responsible that partner is likely to be, because there are reputational risks for the investor as well. So what's your experience with foreign investors what are the difficulties when they try to link with local partners, and vice versa? What's the difficulties for local firms as well? And what do you think the government could provide? What help could the government provide in this area? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. So perhaps I start with the second question that you said on what the government could do, because it's a continuation of what we've been discussing up till now. And I think our Excellency, the Minister, started with saying the reforms that reduce barriers. And it's been incredibly impressive what's been done in the last 7 to 8 years. And one thing that government can do is to keep reducing those barriers. So one is to give a bit more liberalization in the rules and regulation, but also clarifying the existing rules so that we know what kind of parameters all of us are playing with, and there's a level playing field for international investors and local businesses alike. And I believe the government's doing that. And Permanent Secretary just mentioned as well that in the beginning, the line ministries, the way that they interpret the law versus applying the law could have been a little bit difficult. And if that can be increasing coordination amongst the ministries, and also for the various ministries to understand the bigger objectives of investment promotion and how that can help the country, and how each individual ministry can play a role in that, that would be fantastic. And I'm pleased to say that I'm seeing that. And I think it takes a little bit of time. I think all of us sometimes are impatient, right? We forget the fact that reform processes take decades. And this is a country that was isolated, closed off for so long that so many of the concepts that have developed in the 50-odd years that we've been isolated are completely foreign and alien to us in every single segment of the country, be it government or private business. So there's going to be some time to familiarize ourselves again. And I do see it happening. I'm incredibly encouraged when I go into ministries and see the government officials being completely switched on and conversing. And I think I have the benefit of speaking in the local language. And every time I speak in the local language and understand the depth of appreciation that the government officials have, I get very, very encouraged, because I know that better change is continuing to come down the line. So that's with regards to the government. With private businesses, I've now been back involved in the country since the country opened up. And as you say, I have a bit of a lens of what an international investor might look like, given the background that I had being overseas in the capital markets and in the investment space. And exactly as you said, what the international investors tend to look for is corporate governance, some sort of codified method of establishing relationships and joint ventures. Whereas here, again, there was no precedent. So the business community here just needed to understand a bit of what all these Western investors especially are coming in to do and what is expected. So that's the outcome of the isolation that we've had. But in addition, so many of the rules and regulations on investment these days are Western. It's Anglo-Saxon Western, which is based on let's negotiate everything that could happen beforehand and then sign on a piece of paper. And if something goes wrong, let's refer back to that piece of paper. Whereas we're Asian, we work based on trust. We work based on face saving. We say let's if I trust you, let's get into it. And if something bad happens, we're going to take care of each other. So there is this sort of cultural difference whereby sometimes the negotiations get difficult. But that's not unique to Myanmar. I think you'll see it across the region. But of course, in the world of globalized business, we all have to understand how each other operates. And at the minimum, when you have international investors or joint venture partners or minority shareholders involved, corporate governance becomes very important, which is why today I'm delighted to be wearing my Myanmar Institute of Directors hat, which is an organization that we exist solely to increase corporate governance in the country. And there again, I'm incredibly encouraged because I see so many people in the private sector coming to listen to the Myanmar Institute of Directors courses on corporate governance. People actually not only listening, but in the last 4 or 5 years since corporate governance efforts have started in this country, people have gone from not knowing what the word corporate governance means to saying, well, we're along this part of the journey. Can you help us get better at how the board is managed? And how do we run an audit committee? How do we do disclosure appropriately? Can you help us and come and consult us on how we take better care of the organization? And all these are incredibly important because I do believe that certain economies and certain cultures have a predisposition towards wanting to do the right thing. And I'm not saying it because I'm a Myanmar person. I believe that given the time that I've spent away from this country, I have a bit of a bit more objective point of view, but I've been incredibly encouraged at how many people here want to do the right thing. And if you look at businesses, especially the second generation, understand the need for doing the right thing, and that external capital is important, and that if they don't get their act together and improve their game in this internationalized world, that they're going to lose out even in the domestic businesses. And they are understanding that increasing the pie is more important, and taking care of who is in your pie is important, rather than maybe the previous generation was fearful and worrying that the businesses that they've built over many years will now be taken over by people that they don't know. So yes, international investors obviously, and when I speak to the local community here, I always say, let's put ourselves in the shoes of an international investor. If I asked you to go and invest in Nigeria, if I asked you to go and invest in the United States, what would you feel? What would you like to know? What kind of protections would you like? What kind of agreements would you like? And if you look at it from that point of view, that's probably what other people want from you as well. I'll just end. I know we don't have a lot of time. I'll end with just saying that, I hope that when you come back next time, I guess it might not be in 6 years, but maybe in 10 years, that we will still see that incredible improvement. And the words can still be that this is unprecedented once again. I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna, but I really do believe that we are still in a very, very good trajectory here.
Yes, thank you, Tidia. That was very, very interesting. And I agree. The corporate governance, there have been a number of improvements already, but it will be a very important step going forward, I think. And it can almost be argued that some of the Asian financial crisis over 20 years ago stemmed from poor corporate governance. So it's an important, very important issue, and I think it will be increasingly so in the future. But my colleague Tiana is not going to be happy with me, but I'm still going to ask you a question, Chris. One of the, I know you were involved, I think, in the company law, the new company law when it came up, but one of the new laws is the Insolvency Law. And I wonder if you have any, how do you think the new Insolvency Law will help address distressed companies? And this is a particular issue perhaps during the COVID pandemic. So how do you think that the new law what do you think the improvements will be from the new insolvency law? And if you have any thoughts on the arbitration law or the investor grievance mechanism as well, we'd be pleased to hear them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Stephen. Great to talk about some of the very positive reforms that have been made. I've been lucky to be involved in a couple of them with the company law and the investment law. Now we have the insolvency law as well. It's on the books. It's a very well prepared law. Again, like those other two laws I mentioned, pleased to say, wearing my AUSTRAM hat, that it had the benefit of Australian technical expertise as well. But it does represent quite the consensus approach, I think, to best practice in insolvency administration. And if you can never plan for these things, but the timing, it's needed now more than ever with the economic shock that we're facing. So what it does, I think, for me, one of the more interesting elements of that law is, unlike the system that we had leading up to it, does provide an opportunity to deal with temporary economic shocks and liquidity problems that we're having now, which would otherwise mean that very good, very viable businesses with a great future ahead of them, employing many people depending on them. Previously, if they ran into a liquidity challenge, business would have to close. All those people would be out of work. That potential could not be realised. But now, with the introduction of a new restructuring mechanism, there's an ability to call a pause, to restructure that business, to look at ways of making it viable again, introduce new investment, and give birth to it, so that those livelihoods are protected, and so that business can develop. So that is a huge step forward, and that's exactly what we need at a time like now. Unfortunately, implementation has lagged a little bit. So while we have a good, and this is the story, I think, and it runs through your report. There is a bit of a story here of a kind of a major high-level black letter law reform being done. But in a sense, the harder work is on implementation. So still quite a bit of work needs to be done to develop the institutions to allow that insolvency law to do the work that it needs to do. And that means working inside the court system. It means developing professional capability. It means making people aware in the private sector what their options might be in these circumstances. And then there's the governance element as well. I mean, insolvency, protecting against insolvency is one of the key duties that directors need to be on the lookout for. So we do still have a lot to do to get the most out of that law, but it is very timely and a step in the right direction. Similarly with arbitration, similarly with the investor grievance mechanism, it's symbolically important, legally very important to provide options to investors who do want to challenge a decision that they feel has been incorrectly made, or to question a bureaucratic process when they're trying to make an investment, or to resolve in a fair and transparent way a commercial dispute that they may be having with their partner. This happens everywhere, and really the economic success of a country and its ability to keep on growing and attracting new business depends on having that system to work those things through. So we have the building blocks for it in place, but now I'd really like to see us move towards a sort of generation 2 of these kinds of reforms, where we are working mainly with government, mainly inside the ministries, but also in raising capacity among private sector actors as well, to improve the way that these things work in practice, so that the next level down, the rules, the procedures, having the technical capability to do it, having expectations as to sort of timeliness of decision making and so on. That's the thing that's going to make the big difference next. But boy, we certainly have come a long way in a short space of time.
Yes, thanks, Chris. I mean, I think we saw from the Minister U Thong Thun's speech, Myanmar is in a hurry. And we've seen already what's the changes since 2012, and it's impressive. But yes, as you both mentioned, implementation takes time to get right. It takes changing. Not only we've talked about changing the corporate culture, but we need to, in a sense, change the government culture as well, and officials need to sort of change their mindset slowly. And this might take a new generation of officials. It doesn't happen overnight, but I think we clearly have to give Myanmar the credit for the speed of reforms that we have seen. Well, I think we need to conclude this panel. I know there are a lot of questions coming in. And I'm sorry that we don't have time to answer them. We also had a second round of questions for the panelists that we won't be able to get to. But I would suggest that you write, if you want an answer to the questions you're asking today, you can write to me or to Fernando Mistura at our email address at the OECD. And we will try to address the questions that you're asking today. We think it's important to continue this discussion going forward. Well, let me thank the panelists. That was a very interesting exchange. So to close on the panel on the investment policy review, we're often quoting Ong Nang-gu, I find. I quoted him in my presentation today. We quote him in the investment policy review. We quote him in our brochure that we send to governments to try to get them interested in a review. He's very quotable. And I think yesterday when we were discussing, he said something else that I think I would like to end with. He said, this investment policy review is a gift from the old government to the new one. And I think there's no better way to express it as we close this session. It's a gift, it's a public good that we are offering with the help of the old government to the new government when it comes in next year. And I think there are a lot of different recommendations, and I didn't mention it before, but these recommendations are backed by our own OECD members. It's not just what I think about what Myanmar should do. It's really what the OECD member countries, 37 countries, think about what the development path for Myanmar. So I encourage the government, the new government, to look at these recommendations and to take them forward. I encourage stakeholders to use this review in their own interactions with the government, and of course, development partners to think about how they can take some of these recommendations going forward with the government. So on that note, I'll close this session. I thank you again to the panelists, and I will give the floor to Tiana. I'm sorry, Tiana, that we ran on, but the opening session ran on too. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
No worries, Stephen, and thank you all for that very fascinating panel. As we transition into the second panel, and I'm waiting for the panelists to turn on their cameras, allow me just to say welcome everyone and to the second panel of the day, which will focus on attracting quality investment and building resilience through responsible business conduct and international labor standards. We have an excellent panel with us today, composed of business and NGO leaders. And we're in fact quite lucky because a number of our speakers today have led efforts in Myanmar for years to promote responsible business conduct, or RBC as we have been referring to it throughout the discussion today. So they really have a unique perspective and vision, which we plan to take full advantage of. I will introduce each of them as we go along, of course. And I do realize that you haven't yet had a chance to read the review, and we are in fact running out of time. So I would also encourage you to get in touch with us also on the questions on responsible business conduct. So the way that our discussion will be structured, we'll start with one round of questions, and then if we can, we'll try to get to at least one audience questions, but I'm not promising anything. Our panelists have agreed to keep their remarks brief, 3 to 5 minutes. So please try to enter your questions in the chat box, and we'll see if we can get to them. Before opening the floor, I wanted to highlight just one point to help us frame the discussion around responsible business conduct. When we talk about responsible business conduct, we're referring to treating environmental and social issues as a core business question. And I think that it's an important moment and an important point to remember because responsible business conduct is not an add-on to regular business. It is about how business is done. And I quite liked what Thierry said earlier. It's about growing the pie, but also taking care of who is in your pie. And why we insist on this in the investment policy review about this particular definition is because that is also what we're seeing happening in the global markets. And since the COVID crisis, we have all seen that there have been major developments on responsible business conduct in the global market. Early reports already show that and suggest that RBC is seen as a marker for long-term performance. So you've seen already from the EU, Switzerland, and Norway about what's been happening in their markets on RBC. And just to also highlight that just in the past 2 weeks, ASEAN and APEC leaders have cited RBC as a key topic in the comprehensive recovery plans for COVID and in the APEC visions. So like for most countries, investment will be key for Myanmar recovery as well, but investors are likely to become more risk averse and selective. So this changing supply chain against the backdrop of convergence in expectations and climate change means that RBC increasingly not a choice, but rather it's a survival strategy. It's a strategic orientation that will help businesses survive the next generation and post-COVID recovery. So let me start with Director Donglin Lee, who heads the Office of the International Labour Organization in Myanmar. Director Lee, nice to see you. ILO has estimated that 20 million people in Myanmar are at a medium to high risk of economic disruption due to COVID, either as workers or migrants or in vulnerable households. So could you tell us from ILO's perspective, what actions should be prioritized to protect workers while also taking into account that enterprises are dealing with an unprecedented crisis?
Thank you, Madam. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you all know, the pandemic has significantly affected enterprises, workers, and their families in Myanmar, particularly vulnerable workers, such as those in the informal sector, migrants, workers in micro, small, and medium enterprises. Let me give you an example. Only in garment and textile sectors in Myanmar, which contribute to over 20% of a country's export and offer job opportunities for around 1 million workers, of which 90% are women. The ILO estimates put the job disruption to more than 600,000. Her Excellency State Councillor delivered a video message in July this year at ILO Global Leaders Day. She mentioned the 3 most affected sectors in Myanmar, namely garment industries, hotels and tourism, and MSMEs. She called on a global cooperation that delivers concrete actions in response to the common challenges we face on the future work. From ILO side, in terms of alleviating the impact of the pandemic issues, we proposed the 4 key pillars. First one, stimulating the economy and jobs. Second, supporting enterprises, employment and incomes. Third, protecting workers in the workplace, including occupational safety and health. The fourth, using social dialogue between government, workers, and employers to find solutions. Measures to mitigate the immediate economic disruption and to stimulate a strong recovery in the medium term and the long term requires government leadership and support. It also underlines the need for social dialogue between workers and employers organizations during the times of crisis. There is a good example that Myanmar government has engaged with the workers and employers organization in responding to COVID-19 through social dialogue process, including as a part of the National Tripartite Dialogue Forum. So we hope to continue this social dialogue process during the recovery period. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Director Lee. And that was really illuminating. In particular, what struck me was the point about the importance of social dialogue, because it's clear that from this crisis, we have to come out together. I'd like to ask our business representatives to jump in here, in fact. And Doc Kine, if I can ask you perhaps to start. You're the Executive Committee member and Joint Secretary of UMFCCI, as well as the Secretary General of the Garment Manufacturers Association. So you have a firsthand view of how businesses are dealing with COVID-19. On the one hand, there are canceled orders due to global demand contracting, but on the other hand, there's an ever greater need to ensure that critical supplies such as food and protective equipment are manufactured and reach the markets in time. You've been one of the leading business voices in Myanmar advocating for RBC at the factory level for many years, but you've also called for better purchasing practices and more support for Myanmar businesses and by extension, workers. The Myanmar Fund comes to mind here, and I believe you've been involved in that yourself. So can you tell us what type of support would be most needed to help Myanmar businesses stay afloat, while also sustaining efforts on RBC and not forgetting the advancements that have already been made? And if I can ask you maybe to comment, not just in the short term, but also medium and long term.
Thank you, Tiana. In fact, COVID-19 showed how integrated everything is, with the need to look at integrated approaches and responses, not just for COVID, but also other major challenges, including RBC and respect labor's rights, et cetera, et cetera. To sustain efforts on RBC and respect labor's rights, the very first thing the businesses have to do is strive to survive. That's very important, strive to survive. We are to discuss on global supply chain, let me talk on Myanmar garment sector first. We are manufacturing service providers, known as CMP. We want to request, our request aims not only to the international brands and companies and traders, but also to the order placers that, our concerns grow more and more based on what the sector is experiencing in the country at the moment. To stay afloat in the period, we expect brand companies, traders to honor the terms of purchasing contracts and fulfill obligations on payment terms. That's one thing. And to make proper plans to take responsibility of the suspended delivery or shipment, to understand and accept delay of delivery, not cancel confirmed orders for which factories have made production plans already. And another one is very important, to make all efforts and engage with local stakeholders for a better understanding of the local situation and context. Why am I saying this? Because this comes despite brands' repeated claims of responsible business conduct, participation in various ethical social initiatives, and the promotion of international labor standards in their corporate policies, even though most factories are trying very hard to meet brands' individual buying policies and code of conduct. There are some incidences where buyers stop placing orders because validity of factory's compliance certificate expires during COVID-19 and cannot be extended because of travel restrictions. It would be very helpful if the brands reconsider flexibility in this kind of situation, because for garment factories, orders mean workers' salaries, very important. Another point I would like to raise is a brand's code of conduct, which should be aligning not only with the international norms and standards, but also with our local legislation and context. That is for the Myanmar garment sector. For business as a whole, Myanmar has been working to promote responsible business conduct. Although there has been some progress, much needs to be done because it is not only about legislation and guidelines written on paper. It is about the implementation and compliance that needs thorough understanding of what it is. Awareness for responsible business conduct remains low in both employers and employees. It is necessary to understand what RBC is and how they can contribute. And another major need is a capacity building, which is not only for businesses, but also for the private sector. So one of the main issues I would like to discuss here is to identify the need for harmonization of all the relevant laws affecting businesses. A business has to deal with a multitude of laws, such as Myanmar investment law and laws for trade, labor, minimum wage, environmental tax, so on and so on. The issue is when these different laws are not synced with each other, that create all sorts of operational and legal obstacles for businesses to proactively embrace RBC. For example, the latest version of Myanmar investment law was passed in 2016, Myanmar company law in 2018. However, some aspects of its implementation are tied to colonial era labor laws from the mid-1900s that have not been updated to better gel with the current context and conditions. It is difficult for businesses to practice RBC within the current unharmonized legal framework. Challenges arising include issues on excessive paid holidays, which link to productivity. A harmonized legal framework will serve as a multiplier effect. It will streamline the legal and administrative hurdles for many businesses, which in turn will lead to both business sector confidence and improve employer-employee relations and be more and able to adopt and implement RBC. So during COVID, we have seen various disruptions on the normal function of society and businesses. The disruptions of business operations, supply chains, trade and travel have vastly amplified the overall impact of the pandemic. In this context, many businesses in Myanmar are fighting tooth and nail to remain afloat. And some have managed to adapt, while others are in perilous waters and have already fallen as an economic victim of COVID-19. But we have the chance how we can improve it. What we have also seen is that while businesses strive for survival and the government has been doing what it can with economic relief and recovery packages, there still is room for more flexibility on certain issues, such as extending grace periods or having a more lenient time frame. In summary, our request to global supply chain actors in the apparel sector to maintain ethical sourcing initiatives and considering flexibility to avoid pushing major burden on the local producers and workers who are the weakest in the global supply chain. And there is a need for a harmonized legal framework where all relevant laws are updated and in sync with the current situation. Colonial era 1950s laws continue to affect the operations of businesses today in 2020. Having laws are just not enough. There's also need for all stakeholders, government departments, businesses, development partners, employers, employees, and unions to be fully aware of the legal frameworks, the regulations and notifications, so that these laws can be implemented as intended uniformly. It will also enable businesses to operate better and serve as both an enabler and multiplier for RBC. And finally, there's also room for flexibility, especially in the COVID-19 context, where departments and other relevant entities can adopt certain flexibilities in line with the law to ensure that businesses have a fighting chance to survive. We would expect OECD and all other helping hands to provide technical assistance for overall review of business and investment-related legislations towards a harmonized framework as an outcome. We very much love RBC to be an ornament for Myanmar businesses.
Thank you for that, Dr. Nkine. And in fact, there's 2 points that are perfect leads into our next 2 speakers. And the first one that I would like to ask Nicolas Delange, who is the chairman of EuroChem, to address is this issue of global markets being interconnected. And I would actually like to ask you to provide a perspective of foreign investors here. EuroChem, I know, is highlighting RBC among its members. We heard earlier from the EU ambassador about all of the different developments at the EU level and the expectations that the EU is setting on European investors that operate abroad. So how do you see your role in supporting Myanmar in this crisis and beyond, and why? And I think that that's one element that I would like to ask you to highlight is the strategic vision for positioning Myanmar in global supply chains and the role of foreign investors that you would see. And after you, Vicky, if I can give you a heads up, I think you'll go next. And I would like to, with you, shift gears to policy, in fact. So, but turning over to Nicola first.
So thank you. I will start maybe with your last point. Why does it make sense for Myanmar to embrace responsible business conduct? If we just look at the export to European market, we are talking about billions of euros in terms of trade. So this is significant. And if you want to access those markets, you need definitely to embed certain components related to social, environmental, and governance topics. But let me get back to your questions. You're asking me how European members, Eurocham members, are working on it. So Eurocham, it is 85 members. And if we look at the different elements which can define what is a responsible business in Myanmar, the first one that I would like to stress is we pay our tax. And if I look at the top taxpayer, we have Total, which was one of the highest taxpayers in this country last year. We have Telenor Myanmar as well. And so we fulfill our obligations. The second point, which is important and which was stressed by His Excellency Ranieri Sabatucci, we are very keen and we are doing our very best to offer dignified jobs. We are supporting directly 10,000 jobs, and indirectly we are contributing to the livelihood of 200,000 people. The second point that I would like to stress, which echoes the remarks of Kain Kainwei, is basically we are all in the same boat right now. We are all suffering from the consequences of the COVID. So it is extremely difficult for all of us to cope and to adapt. If I look at the figures, we did a survey among our members to check and to ask them how they are impacted by the crisis. And actually in August, 75% of our members told us that they had fewer sales, delaying the project because, and this is back to your point, the supply chain are disrupted today. And so when we look at the figures, the financial figures, almost 40% of our members lost at least 30% of their revenue, which is extremely significant. But when we are dealing actually, and when we are trying to manage this adversity, we need clarity. And basically this is where and how the government can also support, because we need to have extremely clear rules so that we can adjust and to adapt, so that the enforcement can be anticipated. And it can be critical, actually, and it can make a lot of difference between a business who will manage to survive and, unfortunately, a business who will fail because of this lack of visibility. And the last point that I would like to stress is basically, and usually, when we talk about European businesses or responsible business conduct, crises are actually a good time to really assess, if we walk the talk. And so I just would like to stress a few examples of initiatives undertaken by different companies which are doing their very best to walk the talk right now. Because if we don't do it now, well, we will never do it after. Or it will be easier to do it after, but it will not reveal actually our character. So a few things. In the government, and I think that Dongmin, you highlighted this, many European companies actually were very keen to engage with ILO and with union to engage and to develop social dialogue. Because again, you cannot solve this issue alone. It's not the business alone, and then you have the workers and then the government. And so different initiatives were engaged. Some of our members issued various statements to foster this social dialogue. So it is something which is extremely important. The other element, when I look at the tourism sector, tourism is badly hit by the current crisis in Myanmar, and we have many foreign investors and European investors in the hospitality sector. And they provided hotline to their people to get support and to deal with the current crisis, because there is social consequences to this crisis when you cannot go to your work, when you are suffering, and when you are struggling, you need support. And so Accor did that and supported different elements. And the last element that I would like to highlight is if we look in the telecom sector, it is extremely challenging from time to time actually to act and to comply with the law when basically you will eventually disagree with some elements and some consequences of the law. And I will give a specific example here. When we look at the ban and when we look at the current situation in Rakhine and Chin State, where the internet access is removed, it actually has some consequences for the people. And so we need actually to engage the different authorities to assess and to clearly identify the current consequences of decisions that may have adverse impact on the society and on the population. And so therefore, we strongly believe that when we talk about responsible business, there is no responsible business without responsible government. And so that's why we need to work hand in hand to deal with all those challenges and to find a way forward, because again, we are all in the same boat. And this is definitely something that we wish as responsible investors. We need the support from Myanmar authority to fulfill our duties fully.
Thanks, Nicola. And Vicky, this is perfect lead into the question for you, in fact. I mean, we've heard about the need for clarity and harmonization of laws already from several speakers, and it was mentioned as well in the speeches today. You've been the director of the Myanmar Center for Responsible Business, and you have been an advocate for integration of RBC in various policy areas for many years, including investment and corporate governance, as we all know. So where do you see the most opportunities to push for policy coherence and shift, really, especially, for example, when it comes to the Myanmar Economic Recovery and Reform Plan? And if I can put you on the spot, if you don't mind, and ask if you have a view on what would be, let's say, 2 or 3 main priorities from your perspective.
Thank you very much, Tihana. Well, as a starting point, the Myanmar Economic Recovery and Review Plan is coming from the 2 major economic ministries, but I hope it will be genuinely cross-government and that it will cover things beyond the nerdish questions of monetary policy and so on, but really get into these big issues around energy transition and so on. In terms of sort of my 3 wishes, I think the first has really been covered first by Thierry in the first panel and then by Kai Wei in this panel. It is this point about consistency of legislation. And I would like to see the government looking at this from the point of view of the investor journey. How are they experiencing it? How are they, put yourselves in their shoes and talk to some of the experienced investors here. We had a question on the chat from Myanmar Metals, one of the senior shareholders in that, asking when is a decision going to be made on Bordwin Mine, which is probably the game changer in mining in Myanmar today. It has the potential to have a huge revenue impact on Myanmar, but they've been waiting for that permission. And I think for investors, they need to know what are the steps, how long is it going to take, because they have shareholders who are nervous. But equally, that investor journey is not just about what the different ministries are going to require. It's also about what the external stakeholders want and require. How much has that been taken into account in the planning for that mine or for any other investment? And I think that's something which at an early stage needs to be taken into account in the investor journey. There's got to be the local consultation, not purely through the mechanics of an EIA process, but a much more political negotiation effectively, particularly in areas which are ethnic minorities, because there the local people want to know what are going to be the benefits of this for us. So an investor journey approach for the next government, I think, would be very useful. My second wish would be the integration of green economy objectives into the recovery plan. I hope that when we see it, that it will be greener than the earlier draft. Obviously, for climate change reasons, but also because this is where the money is. This is where the money is going to be for the next 5-10 years, whether it's from the private sector or from development institutions. We saw earlier this year that Shui Down got the first green loan in Myanmar from OCBC in Singapore, 44 million, to upgrade their energy efficiency. there's going to be more money like that around, and the government needs to be pursuing the kind of policies that you've got in your green economy chapter in the investment policy review to support the private sector in then accessing this kind of finance. And there was another question I saw on the chat from Do Yin Win, a law professor in Taunji. So she was asking, how do you balance environment and development? Number one, I think, as part of this is good spatial planning. There are areas which should not have gold mines. There are areas which should not have resorts on fragile coral reef ringed archipelagos. And that has to be, again, decided and planned up front rather than what we have at the moment, which is some businessman decides he wants an island, goes and applies for VFE permission. And the next thing that we know, both there is, destructive development on the island and the local fishermen are losing their access to it. So that spatial planning is a hugely important part of the current land law reform process. And that should be at both the national, but also at the state and region level. And then my final wish, and this is perhaps the most difficult one, is that the government should understand better how investors here are having to answer back home to their shareholders, to the media, to campaigns. So Nicolas has picked out one particular hot issue, which is the current instructions to telecoms companies, basically to abuse human rights. When they're told, block those websites because they have words like justice for Myanmar in it, that is a human rights problem for the company that they are having to respond to with their media, with their shareholders, with their investors. The government needs to understand that that's the kind of instruction they're giving companies, and perhaps question, should they be giving that instruction? Why? Another example, which you've mentioned in the investment policy review, relates to the VFE law and mining exploration, where mining companies who aren't yet anywhere near mining are being told, go out and get VFE permits for land that you want to explore on for maybe a day. You don't want to dig a hole there, you just want to pick up a few rocks. So again, the government's got to actually listen when companies say, please don't make us do this because you'll be making us abuse human rights. So that's my third wish, that the government gets a more sensitive understanding of what the business responsibility to respect human rights really means and what that means for them as policymakers and as regulators. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. And indeed, we've heard today, throughout the day, about the capacity building and the necessity to understand the bigger picture here. And I really quite like what you said about also being clear about the political direction. And I think that that's something that last but not least speaker, Professor Dr. Ong Tan Tet can also partially address. You sit among your many leadership roles on the Myanmar Investment Commission, Professor Ong Tan Tet, and you've been a champion of RBC for many years in Myanmar. After hearing the interventions from the rest of the panel, could you comment what would, in your view, be some strategic actions that can be taken to not only promote RBC widely, but also ensure that it is implemented? And in particular, where do you see and how can Myanmar Investment Commission really take on board a number of ideas that have been shared throughout the panel today?
Thank you very much. And I thank my panelists for giving very important inputs. And I do hope my comments would add to the discussion. The first point will be, I think we need to have a better understanding of the ecosystem of business in Myanmar. It is not just the private sector, nor the SOEs, state-owned enterprises. We also have something like what we call the social enterprises, which is now gaining strength. And of course, we should not ignore the military-owned enterprises. We have a huge military-owned establishment. So when we talk about RBC, we should try to look at the entire landscape to map out what are the different actors in the business world, and not just focus on the private sector and the multinational companies. It's a much broader perspective is needed to ensure that RBCs will be taken into consideration in all these different, among the different actors. So my first point will be, let us make sure that we have a full understanding of what business really means in Myanmar. because we can not ignore the military-owned enterprises. Whether we can make any difference or not, that's a different issue. But we should have recognized that the SOEs are very important. We should not only look at the private sector. The second issue is, if you want to address RBC at the strategic level, it must be holistic. We should start from the top, from the BODs, the board of directors, the executives, the managers, but also mobilize the employees and the staff. It is not enough to say that it is the realm of the leadership. It must be the rank and file who are part, because we need whistleblowers, active whistleblowers among the staff. So this would be my second point. Now, in terms of the RBC approach, obviously, in the situation that we have in Myanmar, it must be government-led, but it must be driven by the private sector or the business-driven, because we cannot allow just the government leadership, but it must be owned by the business, but supported by international organizations, agencies like OECD, by the multinational companies. So we need a coalition to work through the RBC. The other point I would like to make is, let us not reinvent the wheel. We have many existing initiatives in Myanmar. So how do we build on what we have? Things like SDGs, the union ministers talks about the MSDP. Now they're talking about the new economic relief plan. We also should not forget the work that Syama Vicky has been doing, and also the issue of CSR, the Global Compact, the Business for Peace, the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. So there's a slew of initiatives which is ongoing in Myanmar. So I hope the RBC takes into account and try to factor in what's being done, what is still need to be pursued. Because otherwise, if we feel that RBC is another initiative among many, then we will not get the kind of traction we want. Now, in terms of practicalities, I do hope we can start with something which the UN did very well, which was on the SDG compass. There was a 5-step process that the SDGs used. So I was thinking of an RBC compass, first being to understand, as Dr. Ngainue mentioned, do we have a full understanding of what RBC means? How do we define priorities? Because there are many things to do, but we should focus on a few things. We should set goals. We should embed RBC. It's not a bolt-on. It must be built-in initiative. And finally, we must report and communicate. So in this, I think we should take a couple of areas, opportunistic programming. The first thing will be good corporate governance. The question is, how do we work with MIOD? How do we work with the Myanmar Anti-Corruption Commission? Because they are doing a lot of work on this. So I would like to suggest that we could start pilot initiatives with the 6 listed companies in the stock exchange. They should be the role model for RBC, because we have 6 already listed. There are many in the pipeline. And we also would look into the UNGC companies. We do have, and Syama Vicky has been very kind to take upon the secretariat function. So what we can start is, we can start with the 15 companies that were the original 15 of the UN Global Compact when we started in 2012. And then my final is, how do we work and build strategic alliance between OECD, between MIC and DICA? Because it should not be something that is, driven by outsiders. It should be embedded into the day-to-day operations of the Myanmar companies. And I hope the chambers, because we have the European chambers and the other chambers, could act as a role model so that we can look upon the companies, the Norwegian companies, the British companies, the American companies, and to see how they are doing RBC and how can Myanmar companies, adopt
the RBC principles. So at the end of the day, I do hope that it is a movement, it is a process, but we have to start now. We have to do it immediately. And I think from the perspective of MIC, I would push my very best, but I'm sure we have many allies among the 4 panelists. We can work together as an initiative. And therefore, if we think of the next, round where OECD shares its investment review, we can then say this is what has been done. But I'm very hopeful because the RBC is part of the Myanmar culture. It is not an alien concept. The question is, how do we ensure that the business people understand that it is in their best interest? It is not something that the government is asking them to do. It is not something that OECD is asking them to do, but something that it is in their interest, that if by doing good, they will do well. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. And I'm just looking at the time, so I don't think, unfortunately, we will have time for one round of questions. I won't even attempt to summarize this great panel. And if anything, it's given us quite a lot to think about. And perhaps we do need to organize a more in-depth discussion once everyone has had a chance to read the review and think about today. But what's really struck me from all of your comments is 3 things. It's clarity, capacity building, and harmonization, and really political direction that would be quite necessary. So before I turn over to the Director General of DICA for closing remarks, I would like to also take the opportunity to thank the team that has worked on the review and on this event, and also to the European Union for supporting Responsible Supply Chains in Asia program, in which Myanmar participates and under which this review and the RBC part was undertaken. So now it's my pleasure to turn over to Director General Tan Sin Lwin to provide closing remarks and inspire us all. Over to you, sir.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Excellencies, all the panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm greatly honored to give the closing remark at the special occasion of launching of the OECD Investment Policy Review of Myanmar 2020 and the Investment Promotion Responsible Investment in Myanmar. I would like to convey my deep appreciation to the work of OECD team in what has been an important event as we bring together pragmatic finding and policy recommendation of the second IPR to see the positive change of Myanmar in near future. And I would like to express my sincere thanks to the governments of Switzerland and Norway for funding support. Also, my profound thanks go to the panelists for sharing your expertise with us, leading valuable outcomes, and to the participants. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we have been hearing, we had a great interest of your valuable interventions is the cause of the event by way of fostering quality investments and building resilience through the benefit of RBC. One message from this event is that responsible investment can essentially and extensively support to the sustainable development. And driving by the government, business sector can ensure cooperate and mainstream sustainability into business model, process, and practices. In other words, businesses are encouraged to solve the challenges of the sustainable development through their innovative business models. Today's event has played a very important role with its great expectations. The emphasis placed on the public sector can be complemented by the event for the need to ensure that the business sector perform responsibly in their business activities in line with the international best practices. And we have to apply the policy framework for strengthening responsible business conduct and promote it through the contribution of all actors, especially from the business sectors undertaking on the ground. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as you might be aware of that, The RBC measures are already set up in our national development agenda and policies, domestic legislations, and new trend of investment agreements, but much more needs to be done. As a keystone, the second IBR deliberately elaborates the way of how to work, making progress, put it into practice, and we are also encouraged to do all the work that matters most to us achieving sustainable prosperity. At the outset of the event, we are now preparing RBC and CSR guidelines to be prescribed for ordering private sector's behavior into a responsible manner. Besides investment monitoring software and online investment aftercare service that can trace the performance of businesses are almost ready to be used. All the above mentions are what we did and what we are doing. But to fulfill our long-term goals, we need collective action from all actors. Again, the second IBR and the events also give us a clear picture of the adopting RBC measures undertaking by collective involvement to rebuild our economy during COVID-19 pandemic and contribute to the sustainable development. Your kind contribution would greatly reinforce our RBC initiative in conformity with the Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan and its connect upcoming Myanmar Economic Recovery and Reform Plan, MERRP, in response to the COVID-19 crisis. This can also be able to withstand and similar shocks. In conclusion, I am deeply impressed by what the OECD has done for us to promote both our investment environment and our RBC expectations in Myanmar. I would like to reiterate our thanks to Excellencies, OECD, the governments of Switzerland and Norway, all the panelists and participants to this remarkable event. All of you who contribute to make this event have a success, and I look forward to meeting with you for our future cooperation. I thank you.
Thank you very much, DG Tan Sinrin, for those closing remarks. Well, let me just say, we don't have any closing speech on our side, but let me just thank you, the Ministry of Investment and Foreign Economic Relations, for your participation today. We had the Minister, we had the Permanent Secretary, and now we have you from DICA. And let me thank you also for your work, your support for the review throughout the whole process, and for the responsible supply chains in Asia work as well that we are undertaking in Myanmar. And I think it demonstrates to those present today, the importance that you stress, the importance you place on responsible investment, on trying to attract responsible investment that has a real impact on the ground in Myanmar. So we look forward to working more with you. The only other comment I would say is that we will make this audio and video, I think we'll make it available online on our website. So we encourage you to listen if you can again, or to invite others to listen. We recognize that these discussions were cut short. We only had 2 hours to cover a lot of ground, and we would be very happy going forward to discuss more, perhaps in smaller groups, more focused areas. Once stakeholders have had a chance to go through the the investment policy review, we'd be happy to discuss again. And we look forward to welcoming you, DG, to Paris sometime to discuss the review and ongoing work with Myanmar. So thank you. With that, I think we can close the session. It was a very instructive, a very interesting discussion. Thank you, DG.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.